Here we are today with Terry Waite, who was kidnapped in 1987 and taken by Hezbollah, a terrorist group. Yeah. And today we're going to talk about overcoming challenges and adversity. So Terry, can you tell us exactly, for many of the viewers, myself, we all know you, anyone over 40 in this country, we all know you. Can you tell the younger viewers basically what happened? You're special envoy for the Archbishop of Canterbury. You went out to Lebanon to help some hostages and you got taken hostage yourself.
Well, I have a long history of working for the release of people who've been wrongly detained. Detained against the law, detained illegally and kept in bad conditions, which goes back to when I was a comparatively young man and worked in Uganda and was there at the time when the Amin coup took place. And that was a pretty terrible time. Many people were murdered. In fact, so many were murdered that the dam that crosses the River Nile at a place called Ginger, which is just not too far from Kampala, the capital, was blocked with the bodies of the people who'd been thrown over that dam into the river. So it was a bloody time. And many of my colleagues were captured, either because they belonged to the wrong tribe, or the wrong political party, or their face didn't fit for one reason or another. And many were murdered. And I met Amin on several occasions and was able to successfully obtain the release of some people, not too many. Many, I'm afraid, were just put to death. And that was my first experience, really, of negotiating at that level. I've worked in pretty well every conflict situation in the world. Before I joined the Archbishop's staff as an advisor to him on international matters. When I went there, I was involved in negotiating for the release of hostages from Iran during the time of the Iranian Revolution. And the reason I became involved in that was because people, relatives, came and asked if we could help, because they said they were not getting any information and not making any progress with obtaining the release of their people. So I went out to Iran, I negotiated with the Revolutionary Guards, was able to bring people home without payment. I don't believe in paying ransom for hostages, and without any compromise of principle, but through negotiation. And then following Iran, Libya, where I negotiated directly with Gaddafi, and again obtained the release of people. And then Beirut, where I did negotiate with Hezbollah. They always deny, for one reason or another, that they captured me. But I'm pretty sure it was.
You knew your captors were.
Pretty sure it was.
That's. Sorry, you mentioned about something very interesting there about the communication skills. How did you get General Gaddafi to release these people? What did you say?
Well, to explain it a little bit, there are roughly two types of hostage taking. And they're separated for the sake of clarity. And because the negotiating styles differ according to which type of hostage taking takes place. On the one hand, you have hostage taking which is for political purpose. And that means that people are taken and they're used as pressure points to bring about a political goal or political aim that the group may have. The other type would go under the heading of criminal, and that is where hostages are taken primarily for ransom. Now, the two types are both criminal acts, of course, but they're separated because the way in which you would negotiate for political cases is very different from the way you negotiate for criminal cases, where ransom is demanded. all my experience has been in the first one, in the political area.
Mm.
And the way one deals with that is, first of all, you try and establish a face-to-face contact with the people who have the key to unlocking the problem. Now that's not easy. I mean, the way I got, you asked a specific question, the way I got contact with Gaddafi was through the late Julius Nyerere, who was president of Tanzania, and also at the time was president of the OAU, which is now defunct, but the Organisation of African Unity. And I phoned him up one day and said, do you think you could get me a meeting with Gaddafi? Because Gaddafi would be at the OAU meeting.
Yeah.
And he responded by saying, well, he's a very unusual man. I'll do my best. And within a couple of weeks, I met Gaddafi. I was with him in Libya. And the way I approached it, first of all, you have to establish a rapport with who you're speaking. You have to be able to build a relationship with
Am I doing all right, mate?
If you can get a relationship of trust, that's the first thing.
Yeah.
Secondly, you have to be able then to get to the root of the issue. Why? Listen, why is it you're doing what you're doing?
Yeah.
If you can do that, then you can begin to get to the point where you can begin to unravel, hopefully, the problem and find an effective solution. It's not always possible to do that, but it is possible. Those are general ways of working. I mean, you have to be pretty flexible and pretty varied. But you're not in political cases. I don't view it as though you're going in to make the other person look foolish or to win-lose. You're going in to try and understand and to try and get some outcome, which means that face is not lost. Now, hostage taking of that kind still exists, but it's changed dramatically at the moment now. It's more hostage taking. Well, of course, we've seen the increase in that for ransom, Somalia being one particular prime example, but there are many other examples, Nigeria and so on. And sometimes it's a mixture now, a much bigger mixture between political and criminal. And also, although it's true to say that hostages have always been killed, always been murdered. In my day, when I was taken hostage in Beirut, people who were taken alongside me were murdered. The difference between then and now is that the murder is so much more visible because of the social media.
Yeah.
You can look on social media and you can see the beheadings, or you could see them. I've had to watch it professionally, but you can see them. And they're brutal, and they're committed largely by people who are of a psychopathic disposition and who are doing it deliberately as an act of terror, to terrorize people, which is what their intention is. And they succeed in terrorizing people.
Yeah.
It's a very terrible thing to happen. But it's not a new phenomenon, it's just more visible than it was
years in the 80s.
ago.
Yeah. You said about the communications as well. It's like a businessman, say someone wants to make rapport with somebody, somebody meets a businessman in his office and sees like, oh, I see you play golf, and stuff like that. How did that work with Gaddafi? He didn't say, do you play golf? Or do you know what I mean? How did you establish that?
I actually took with me a book of Islamic philosophy of the 6th century.
Right.
Anybody who studies and knows anything about Islam will know that Islam in the 6th century was actually pretty clever at mathematics, at philosophy, at all the great arts. And where Islamists are, by many people wrongly, considered to be ignorant, they have a tradition, a great tradition. Well, it was the 7th century actually, not the 6th century, because Islam was not 626 or 646, I think Islam came around. So it was the 7th century.
Yeah.
But they were fairly advanced in those days. And I took this book along and presented him with a copy, which is immediately saying, I don't regard you as being totally stupid and totally crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
I respect the fact.
You were talking about him, not me.
No, I make an exception.
You like both.
I make an exception in your case. So it's a way of saying, you know, let's talk sensibly, let's talk intelligently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talk about Islam and stuff like that. I mean, I've been looking at some FBI statistics and something, and it's something like 0.00002% of Muslims are terrorists. But we seem to think in this country, because of the bombardment of media, that, you know, everybody's a terrorist sort of thing. Do people get brainwashed a bit too much about Muslims, or?
Well, I think they're victims of the propaganda from groups such as ISIS, who have been very active in that propaganda, and because it is so gruesome, has spread and terrorized people. It's been, from the point of view of terrorizing people, it's been extremely effective. What it has also done, to the detriment of the Islamic faith in general, is that it has virtually, in the eyes of people who don't understand the situation, tarred all Muslims with the same brush, and that is wrong.
Yeah.
And that is very hurtful to Muslims who are perfectly law-abiding, honest, decent people, and who are then seen as in this negative light, which is a great shame. But that is what has happened.
Yeah, yeah. You also said about, you know, there's one guy standing next to you, for example, with a hostage situation. Is it down to luck who dies and who doesn't? Is there an element of luck in it, or is there an element of?
No, I think there's sometimes it is, but sometimes, again, going back to my own experience in Beirut, the people who died there and who were virtually destined to die from the word go, were the people who had a direct connection to the military or to intelligence.
Got you.
If anybody was in the military and fighting as a soldier or undercover in the intelligence world, then they died.
Yeah.
I can think of, who was it, Buckley, CIA station chief in Beirut, he died. UN observers died, and so on. Those who were, I mean, I was very fortunate because I fell under suspicion. One of the reasons I was captured is because the trust I built up was broken, and they wrongly assumed that I was a full-time intelligence agent of America.
Yeah.
And if I hadn't been, I wouldn't be doing this interview now.
Yeah.
I'd be dead years ago.
Yeah. Let's talk about when you actually you went over to basically pull out John McCarthy and many of the other people.
Yes, I went back to Beirut at a time when it was very, very dangerous, and hostages were disappearing off the streets in great numbers. You know, British, American, German, French, so many different nationalities. And the families, again, I went out as a result of an appeal by the families to me to do something. I didn't particularly want to do it. I didn't particularly want to.
Most people wouldn't, though, would they? Let's face it, you know.
Well, the reason I didn't want to do it is because I just finished negotiating for the release of people in Libya, and it wasn't my full-time job. And my job at Lambeth was to travel with the Archbishop to arrange his meetings with heads of state and with diplomatic leaders and with church leaders all around the world. So I just, at the time, I think I was arranging a visit to China, and I was arranging a visit to Australia, which meant my having to go to both those places, and at the same time to try and fit in other work. So I said, really, I can't take this on. But then when they persisted, I agreed, knowing full well that one had to continue if you take up a case. I mean, it's irresponsible to say to grieving relatives, right, I'm going to take up your case, and then when it gets too difficult, say, okay, fine, I'm sorry, I've got to leave now. Yeah. The only time you should leave, in my view, if you're doing that job, is if your involvement becomes dangerous to the hostages themselves. And at that point, then you should say, sorry, I pull out now.
Yeah. So what is it that makes you want to do it? The other situations that you thought, I just want to help people?
Well, I think I think I've always had a sympathy for people who find themselves in extreme difficulties, or in difficulties of any kind. That goes back, I suppose, I've been something with me all my life. That's one thing. And I suppose if you have a certain ability to negotiate, then it's useful to be able to use it.
Yeah.
You know, you might as well deploy it in a useful purpose. So I suppose there are a couple of things. But having said that, and putting the best possible shine on it, I don't think anybody ever does anything for any other person without at the same time recognizing they're doing something for themselves.
Yeah.
You're doing it because you want to do it yourself, and I think there is an element of that in most people. I don't think I'm full of altruism at all.
Yeah.
I think very few people are.
Yeah. So can you tell me, you know, when you went over to Lebanon, when was the time the bombshell dropped? When you thought, oh dear, I'm now a hostage. What happened?
Well, I'd gone out there, and a couple of hostages had been released. I'd made contact with the kidnappers. They told me that they were wanting better conditions for their relatives. They're being held in Kuwait. I was promised to look into that. And it was a very difficult situation. I couldn't get into Kuwait at all. I couldn't help on that front. Then a hostage was released by the name of David Jacobson. And when American hostages were released, they went to Wiesbaden in Germany, where I went and met with them. And one day, I went to see Jacobson, and he was convinced I got his release, and I couldn't think what I'd done. And then someone said, "Have you heard the news?" And I said, "What news?" And they said, "There's a story that arms have been exchanged for the release of hostages." And that was the beginning of what became known as Iran-Contra. Iran-Contra was something that got out in history. Iran was fighting the Iran-Iraq war. It was important for Iran to have victory in that war. Iran was also, at the same time, supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon as a Shia organization. And it had a double agenda. Unknown to me, Colonel Oliver North went to Iran and said, if you'll pressure your clients, Hezbollah, to release hostages, we'll supply you with arms. And that happened. One hostage was released, meant to be kept entirely secret. And of course, I knew nothing about it. I mean, I've known North. I mean, you can't be a negotiator in any of these situations without bumping into people from all the intelligence agencies. If you're the only one to get any significant contact, everybody wants to know you. The difficulty is knowing how much to share and how much to keep back. And if you've got any political savvy at all, you will not say everything, because you know that very often actions are taken by some governments in these situations which you could not possibly agree with. I could not possibly agree with arms dealing. And that faced me with a dilemma. You see, I had to say there, when I came away from that situation, I had to decide whether I was going to pull out then and have the taint of arms dealing over me for the rest of my life and over the church which I represented, or whether I was going to go back and say, right, I'm going to try and pick up the pieces. And so I went back. I don't regret going back. It was the right thing to do. It was a very difficult thing to do, but it was the right thing to do. And it was, it's going back into a situation where the chances now of being killed or captured were extremely high, even higher than they were previously, because of the suspicions that were there.
What was your conditions like in the cell?
Well, the first year was one of, I was in an underground cell. I was chained to the wall for 23 hours and 50 minutes a day.
Not to a radiator that was later sold on eBay.
There's a story about the radiator. Absolutely. No, I've never actually chained to a radiator. I don't think I hardly ever saw a radiator.
Because that was a story flying around, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was a story that I'd seen my radiator on eBay and bought it, and now had it in rooms in college in Cambridge, which is nonsense. But No, I was chained by staples to the wall, 23 hours committed there. I was
23 hours
a day,
a day.
well, longer, or just 10 minutes off to use the bathroom. And in a room which was much of the time in darkness. If I was in a above ground, metal shutters were put in front of the window so no natural light came in. I was blindfolded when I had to pull a blindfold over my eyes when anyone came in the room. I had no books and papers for about 3.5 years. I had nothing. So I slept on the floor 3 meals a day, bread and leaven at breakfast and a cup of tea, often rice and beans or whatever at lunchtime, and the same as breakfast in the evening. And that went on a monotonous diet for quite a long time.
How did you manage to keep sane? Because you're like the sanest person ever, you know?
I think the way you keep sane in situations of that kind is you see your body physically deteriorate quicker than you'd hope. You know, in other words, you're getting older before your time.
Yeah.
Because my beard grew, I began to go white, and my skin grew white because there's no natural light, and lose muscle tone because of no exercise. But what I realised was you have to be able to keep your mind alive. I think a secret of surviving in very difficult situations is to keep your mind active and to keep hopeful. I began to write in my head. I mean, I wrote my first book, Taken on Trust. I wrote that in my head in captivity. Not every word, not every sentence, not every comma. The general outline of it. I mean, if you follow the working of that book, you'll see it moves backwards and forwards in time as the mind works in captivity. At one moment, you're in captivity. At another moment, you're back in childhood. You know, you're bringing up pictures in your mind. And I think what you're trying to do, what I was trying to do, I've always had a respect for good language. And I think good language has the capacity to breathe harmony into the soul. And what you're trying to do by using good language, by writing, I wrote poetry in captivity too, is to somehow find that degree of inner harmony, to keep yourself together. And also, another secret is don't try and do too much in terms of thinking about the future. Live for the day. Remember that your life is now. You have it now. You have it in restricted circumstances, but in those restricted circumstances, live it as fully as possible. I mean, that's what I say often said that to people who are serving civilian sentences in prison. You know, it's a restricted circumstance, it has its difficulties. You still have life, and you still have opportunity there if you want to take it, and you have opportunity to develop and expand your mind if you wish to take it.
Yeah.
So do that. Do what you can do. What you can't do, fine, you can't do it. You know, that's the part of it.
So a lot of it was down to positive thinking?
Yes, I think you've got to try and think positively. Of course, you're going to be scared at times, and you're going to feel depression at times. That's just normal. I mean, I was tortured. I was beaten on the soles of the feet with a cable. I was at mock execution.
How did they do the mock execution?
Well, they took me in another room and put a gun against my head, and then dropped it and said another time. That was after the first year. The first year was one of interrogation. At that point, when they dropped it and said another time, I'd been subject to a lot of questioning. And I think they were trying to determine whether or not I was genuinely humanitarian or whether I was, in fact, an agent of the government. And I was able to convince them that I was genuinely humanitarian. They then said, we're going to release you. And I went to good accommodation for 2 weeks, and then something happened. In the outside world, I'm not sure what it was, but instead of being released, I went back for another 4 years, back to chains.
So what did you actually think when they put the gun to your head and basically said, bye bye?
Well, it's a strange feeling, actually, and I've often read about that type of experience, and I remember answering their questions, and it was almost as though I was standing outside myself, looking at myself from the outside, and saying from the outside, although in actual responding to the questions, I felt my answers were faltering. Looking at me from outside, I said to myself, you're answering very boldly, you're answering very clearly. It was a strange experience. It was very difficult to encapsulate what it really was, what it meant. But I felt fear, not fear of death, because that will happen eventually to all of us. I didn't want to die in that particular circumstance, of course not. But the fear was just the simple fear, will it hurt? As simple as that. I think most human beings would think that. And how are they going to kill me? Are they going to shoot me? Are they going to mutilate me? What are they going to do?
Yeah.
I didn't know.
With you're saying you're like almost out of body. Would you say can people use that in their daily life where they go through a challenging situation and they kind of almost take their mind out of their body and they're looking down from above, thinking this is how to handle a situation? Is that how you would do it?
That's a very similar experience. Yeah, it was very much like that. Now, what that is, I'm not sure. I mean, some people explain it by chemical reaction in the brain. It could well be that. I mean, who knows? But that is exactly what it was. So you're standing outside yourself, looking in on yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how important was your faith in this?
Well, faith is important, but my view on faith is this: that put it this way, that God is a great mystery. I don't believe for one moment that anybody who has faith necessarily has any particular special protection from the ups and downs of life. I don't think it's meant for that at all. I think you take your chances along with everybody else in this world. I think what it does enable you to have is a certain resource which enables you to cope with circumstances as they come along. And my view of faith is this, that where I think the Christian faith, and many other great religions actually, have not been entirely right, is that they have, in some instances, claimed to have the total and absolute truth. And I think that's a mistake. And I would rather side with the scientist who says that we are constantly seeking new truth, and there's always something to find. Now, I think you can equate that with faith, because I think if you take the concept that God is a mystery, and that part of the function of the great religions is to put a human face on that mystery, to provide you, if you like, with a handrail to guide you towards a greater understanding of that mystery which lies within you and beyond you. More a contemplative approach, if you like. But not, and therefore you can say that the actions and the stories contained within the great religions, actually you must look behind them for the deeper meaning and not necessarily take them as absolutely literal. And how many, one of the great problems of many of the religions is they're arguing about whether this is right, whether that is right, all the dogmatic points. They're failing in the essential understanding of progressing towards greater wholeness and to greater mystery. And I believe that one of the fundamental philosophy of mine would be that we cannot fully ever comprehend God, but God is a great mystery. But we are called, in some ways, to be co-creators. And to be a co-creator means that you have a responsibility, not just for yourself, you have to take that responsibility for other people and for the environment of which you are part. We are essential parts of the universe. I mean, it's reflected in the words of the funeral service, actually. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The atoms that constitute my body pre-existed long before my body came into existence. And when I die, They will go back and they will be reconstituted again. They will go on. We're part of the universe which which we're observing.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an essential link between nuclear physics, in particle physics, in general theory of relativity, and quantum theory. Providing an understanding of the framework, and sometimes that framework can seem rather cold. Religion gives it a heart. And it's the same with the body, You have the human body, and you can analyze it and examine it and take it apart and so on. But somehow, there within the human body is the essential spirit that gives life. When you die, there is just the body. And there is something there. And religion provides us with that essential soul, which we can't define. And the language used to define it is different than the scientific language. But they needn't be mutually exclusive. They can belong together.
Do you think that an atheist then can be, can handle challenges as much as someone with religion? Because some people would say, oh, well, religion is a crutch. Or
I think an atheist can. I think many examples of people, atheists and agnostics, doing that.
Yeah.
Personally, I think a more honest opinion, a most honest view, rather, is the agnostic view rather than the atheist view. I think the atheist is equally as dogmatic as the believer.
Yeah.
The agnostic is the one who actually is probably more honest and saying, well, look, I'm not.
Yeah.
Because the atheist is saying, people like Dawkins are so dogmatic, it's almost religious.
Yeah, you atheist religious people, get off your high horse. But to me, it's I can't even comprehend the grandness, and I don't have the answers and stuff like that. It's beyond, isn't it? There's so much beyond. Do you have any resentment at all to your captors?
I don't agree with what they do or what they did. I can understand why.
You wouldn't start a punch-up with them if they walked down the dog and bone or whatever.
Well, I've been back to see them.
You have?
Yeah.
And how did that go?
Well, I'm often puzzled myself as to what can be done in this world to promote better understanding between people, for ordinary people such as myself and others, to work toward peace. And, you can't these days open the newspaper or listen to the news without being incredibly depressed at times at the state of the situation. It's really bad.
Yeah.
Warfare on every hand and trouble in every quarter. And I said, what can we do? And I came up with a very naive and very simple answer. And that is, if only people who've had disputes one with another could sit down, face each other, agree to put the past in the past, we begin to have the basis of political settlement, because there can be no settlement on the ground in disputed areas unless the people on the ground trust each other. So I thought, well, I'm saying that, but I better go and do something about it. So 20 odd years earlier, I'd been given the promise of safe conduct to see hostages who were ill, one was about to die. I'd accepted that, I was captured, word was broken. 20 odd years later, I went back to the same place, headquarters, and sat down with one of the leaders of Hezbollah. And I said to him, we've been through difficult times together. They considerably advanced, I haven't changed, moved on. I said, I don't agree with what was done, but let's put that past in the past and try and build something creative from it. So he said, well, what can we do? I said, well, I'm just back from the Syrian border. I've seen the refugees there. I've seen the terrible sufferings. I said, can you at least let me have heating oil for those people? He said, all right, I'll do that. Now, it's a small gesture. I don't think that's going to necessarily mean at all great political change or what have you. But I do believe, let us say, if 10,000 people in Israel, 10,000 people in the occupied territories, ordinary people were to sit down, you begin to have the basis for political settlement. So when people say there's nothing ordinary people can do, there is something that can be done. It's not easy, it's not difficult, and I'm not naive enough to believe that it's going to happen, or necessarily going to happen overnight. It won't. But I'd like to shake people out of the view that it is only the politicians and the leaders, so-called leaders of communities, who can work in this way. They can't work in this way without people on the ground.
Yeah.
And people on the ground can take their responsibility to do that.
Yeah. And you talked as well about the holding on to the anger. I remember reading a quote from Buddha, I think it was Buddha, might have been somebody else. It was holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at them. You were the one that gets burned.
Well, that's not my quote. I think what I said was, anger is like a consuming fire, seeking all whom it may devour. Do not consume, do not extinguish the flames totally,
yeah.
But warm yourself by the gentle glow of the embers.
Yeah.
In other words, saying anger is a normal human emotion. We all have it, and it can be used constructively and negatively. If you don't deal with it, then it will deal with you.
Yeah.
And anger that festers inside is rather like a cancer that enters the soul. It does more harm to those who hold it than against those to whom it's held.
Yeah. And
you see that time and time again. So it doesn't mean to say you won't feel angry or you should never be angry. It does say learn to deal with it constructively rather than letting it deal with you negatively.
Well, I'm glad you're not angry at my questions, mate, because you're a big guy and you just go like that. Get out. So you've been doing a lot of amazing charity work. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Well, I'm president of an organisation called Atheist for the Homeless, and I opened First Community in the United Kingdom, in Cambridge, 20 odd years ago. Enables homeless people to come into a community, have a good standard of accommodation, leave behind the door, work according to their abilities in renovating furniture, renovating white goods, which are sold on, and begin to get back into life. Because if you've been on the streets for years, it's a pretty difficult business to get back into life.
Yeah. Very
successful. We've got 29 communities now in the last few years, and another 7 coming along, 7 or 8 coming along. And goodness knows how many homeless people now have been got back into life at the pace they can manage. Hostage UK, which gives support to hostage families, does training seminars for those who are professionally engaged in the field. That started in the UK, it's now growing, it's now developing into Hostage International. We have set up in America recently. We've got setting up in Rome, and in Australia and other places, developing international agency. That's doing very well, giving a lot of support to hostage families, in particular those who are families of those who've been so brutally treated in recent years. Then White Care, one of the reasons, which is, I founded 30 years ago now. White Care is an organisation that gives job opportunities for young people around the world. And where there are no job opportunities, youngsters are open to joining terrorist groups and finding, some identity and some purpose in those groups once they're in the court. So
I used to terrorise my parents.
Terrorise me anyway, that's right. So, anyway, that's going well.
Yeah.
And then I do a lot of work in prisons and stuff. But just get on with it. Yeah.
And you had a book out many years ago called Taken on Trust. It's 25th anniversary, it's a best-selling book. And Paul Hughes back there, our amazing cameraman, has been reading it on the way up. And you found a quote about an underdog or something like that, didn't you, Paul?
Oh, I did indeed, yeah. It's from Taken on Trust, and it says, "Through my life, I have always had a sympathy for the underdog, the one who finds him or herself excluded or on the margins of society.
That's why I agreed to do this lecture today.
Well, I tell you what, that's so fitting, because what Terry doesn't know is I've got a book out called The Underdog.
Really?
Yes, I've got a copy for you there.
Oh, right.
So yeah. So that's right. We leave it there. We promote Terry's book because you've got a new book coming out.
Well, it's out now. It's called. It is actually. Well, I've got two books actually. Two of those. I've written about 6, but these 2 are out at the moment. There's one called Out of the Silence, which is a book of narrative and poetry.
Yeah.
And it's the type of thing I used to write in captivity.
Yeah.
In order to promote that degree of harmony, good language again, trying to use good language. And then a totally different book. One of the things you must do in these situations of desperation is you must not lose your sense of humour. It's important to laugh.
What if people go through an extremely difficult time, like, they go out shopping one day, they come back, and there's a parking ticket?
Well,
what do they do to handle such an immensely challenging situation?
Throw away the car and take the bus. Seriously. I mean, obviously we all get annoyed. We all get annoyed at those things. We all get cross about that. And for burglary, if someone comes and wrecks my house, I'm going to be very, very angry, of course.
You'll have to call that off, Andrew.
Of course you would. But somehow, again, in all these situations, you really need to say, well, there are people in far, far worse situations than myself. Yeah. And I can always say it in captivity. But what I did in captivity, I used to tell myself stories to make myself laugh. And one of the books I've written is called The Voyage of the Golden Handshake, which is a story. I've often lectured on cruise ships. This is a story about a cruise ship where everything goes wrong. They go around the world. And it's a comic novel.
Yeah. Is that available on Amazon?
It's available on Amazon.
So you've got Taken on Trust, you've got Out of the Silence, and
The Voyage of the Golden Handshake.
The Voyage of the Golden Handshake. I like that.
It's a comic novel, and it does all right. Yeah, it does fine. Yeah. I mean, I wrote it. I wrote it because just for the fun of writing it. I enjoyed writing it. It made me laugh. It reminded me of some of the stories that I used to make myself laugh with in captivity.
Fantastic. And if people want to see more of your stuff, there's the websites. You've got the website.
I don't have a website.
But you've got the website for the
for the book. The book. They're on Amazon, I think.
They're all on Amazon, and then the charities, they're obviously.
Oh, the charity, Atheist UK, ENNAUS, Hostage UK website, that's that. YCAT website, I don't have my own personal one. But they're.
Fantastic. And there's one last thing you'd like to say to people who are sort of just struggling in life now. Just a quick sort of word.
Well, there's a lot of people struggling in life. I mean, more people in this world struggling in life than there are who are not.
Yeah.
And I suppose what I would say is that life can be pretty hard and pretty bitter at times, and it really can be, and it is for a lot of people. And suffering is no respect of persons, and it will land on people regardless of what they've done through no fault of their own very often. But what I've often said is that whilst it is always hard and difficult, in the vast majority of cases it needn't destroy. Often suffering can be turned round and utilised creatively. And when you look across history, you see some of the great works of art, literature, whatever, they've often emerged from situations of great suffering. Something creative has come from it. So I would say, yes, I sympathise, it's hard going. But remember, it needn't destroy you. It is possible for something creative to emerge from it.
Fantastic. Terry Waite, humanitarian, best-selling author, an all-round good guy, and a big supporter of the underdog. Do you like that, mate? Thank you very, very much for your time. It has been an absolute honour and a real pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you to Mark Llewhellin for having us, for making this possible. Thank you to the Travellers Club. Very beautiful in here. And Hope you took something really cool from that, guys, and have an awesome week. Take care. Bye.